The fact that I haven't uploaded a stasis build in the stasis season is absolutely criminal. So here's the only one you will ever need. A hunter setup I have used to solo a GM Nightfall, clear Legend Onslaught with matchmates multiple times, and is adaptable to just about anything else. There's a lot of layers to this build, which I will cover them all in detail coming up. But the best place to start is the exotic armor of choice, Mask of Fealty. This exotic's effects are all based around the stasis shurikens and improving their functionality. The first part is whenever a shuriken bounces, either off an enemy or an object, a small stasis crystal will be spawned at that impact point. This can be shattered for additional damage, but the best part of this is that enemies next to spawn stasis crystals are instantly frozen, essentially making stasis shurikens an instant freeze on enemies directly hit, and this feeds nicely into the second part of this exotic's effect. If you either shatter a frozen enemy or destroy a stasis crystal with a stasis shuriken, a further 3 shurikens will fan out from that location, which can go on to deal extra AoE damage. These effects combined make the stasis melee very versatile. You can use the first charge to freeze an enemy, then the second to shatter and release more shurikens. Or you can throw a shuriken into already frozen targets or existing stasis crystals for very efficient use. The instant freeze is fantastic too. A single shuriken will disable both unstoppable and overload champions, and having freeze available on demand will be huge for the rest of this build, and artifact support, which I will cover next. Oh, and this exotic also returns melee energy on shuriken bouncers, I forgot about that, which yeah, is pretty good too for obvious reasons. Also, since I've recently hit 10,000 subscribers, I want to start doing more community focused events and helps, starting with creating an open Discord server. Here you can join up for LFG groups or just chat with like-minded Destiny players. Even share your own ideas for builds or god rolls. I'll be happy to try them all out. Link to join will be in the description. Now for the subclass setup on this build. It's stasis, so in some spots there isn't exactly a lot of choice. Hopefully at some point we will get alternative supers and melees. But where I can choose, here is what I went with. For grenades, it's coldsnap. These are excellent paired with the aspect touch of winter. It changes the functionality of these grenades so that each enemy tagged will spawn a stasis crystal next to them. The first tag a small crystal, the next a medium, and then the final will spawn a large stasis crystal. Just like the Mask of Fealty's effect, this adds a lot more AoE shatter potential and turns this utility grenade into a viable damage option too. You can even use the crystals spawned as a primer for the shurikens. These grenades are also incredibly easy to use. Just throw them somewhere near a group of enemies and they'll do all the work for you. The other aspect option really just has to be Grim Harvest. Any enemy defeated which is affected by a stasis debuff, which is pretty much all enemies, will generate a stasis shard. These critically give back melee energy so that the shuriken spam can continue forevermore, but also provide stacks of frost armor and a small amount of health when collected. Red bar enemies will create a small shard which restores 10% melee energy and gives 1 stack of frost armor, while elite or high enemies will create a large stasis shard which restores 50% melee energy and gives 3 stacks of frost armor. And for fragments, these are all to enhance what we already have, and are as follows. Whisper of Fissures. This increases the size and damage of all stasis crystals or frozen target shatters. Whisper of Shards. Shattering a stasis crystal grants 500% increased grenade regen for 6 seconds. Whisper of Durance. Slower effects last longer. And a note on this one is it also increases the duration of Silence and Squall from 14 to 16 seconds. Whisper of Hunger. Stasis shards will grant more melee energy. Small shards now grant 17.5% and large shards now grant 75%. Whisper of Conduction. This one simply allows all nearby shards to automatically track to you. So as you can see, a focus on shatter damage and self-cycling abilities, which both freeze and create stasis shards. This package works really well together, but the subclass setup is only one part of it. For this episode, the artifact can also help a lot. These are the options you should always have selected. Column 3 Crystalline Converter. Upon picking up stasis shards, it will progress a counter which causes the next charge melee to spawn additional stasis crystals. Up to 3 stasis crystals can be spawned using this mod, and this fits perfectly into what we're trying to do with this build. Column 4 Armour of Aramis. While Frost Armour is active, being hit to critical health will release a freezing burst. It's more of a survivability option, but a really potent one, especially with the high uptime of Frost Armour. Also, having another source of freezing targets is really nice to have. Column 4, Hail the Storm. This is the big one in my opinion. All shattered stasis crystals release tracking stasis missiles which slow targets inflicted, adding extra AoE damage to all stasis crystals and stacking on top of Whisperer fissures. Column 5, Brain Freeze. Frozen enemies will slow other nearby combatants, basically becoming a Duskfield grenade while frozen. Yet another source of AoE crowd control, and with how easy it is to freeze targets, this effect will be present a lot. There's also a secondary effect for Dark Ether Reaper weapons, which is the seasonal set, in dealing additional damage to frozen targets, if you're using any of these. Additionally, there's a tonic which fits perfectly with these artifact mods in the refined tonic of stasis crystallization. While this is active, the following mods are given these additional effects. For Crystalline Converter, after using a class ability, the next stasis weapon kill will generate a stasis shard. And for Hail the Storm, frozen targets and crystal shatters deal an additional 12.5% damage. And these tonics are only a temporary effect, so you might want to save these for when taking part in harder activities. But the boost they provide is a nice benefit. For weapons, the good news is they are quite flexible. Typically I went with a stasis focused setup with the Agers Sceptre and Chill Inhibitor. These will share weapon surges, and the Agers provides a ridiculously easy method to freezing a bunch of targets, while the Chill Inhibitor is just the best boss DPS weapon available in the game. I also used the VS Velocity Baton with Attrition Orbs. Again, this thing is a standalone fantastic option, but there's a bit more to it with this build. The main downside to Stasis Hunter is having no effective healing method. There's damage mitigation with Frost Armor, but I wanted straight up healing, so using the Velocity Baton to generate a bunch of orbs on demand, and then use the armor mod Recuperation on boots to cure 70 HP on all pickup, and Powerful Attraction on class item to scoop up all nearby orbs on class ability usage. Together, this is the effect of Wormhusk without having to run the exotic, and these orbs will also provide stasis weapon surges. But as I've said, the weapons are flexible. For my solo GM run, instead I went with Lost Signal, Tarnished Metal and Anarchy, because of the Arc Hunger requirement and I needed a weapon to deal with barrier champions. This setup allowed me to play at a longer range while still cycling abilities at an increased rate, as crowd control is desperately needed in the highest battleground Moon GM. Outside of what to use in terms of weapons and loadout options, I think it is just as important to understand how to actually play the build. Typically, I lead with coldsnap grenades or a stasis shuriken if either are available, which is more often than not, and use the stasis crystals generated by either to clear out enemies as they spawn in. This can be seen at its best in activities such as Onslaught, where all enemies come in waves and are in close proximity to each other. All stasis final blows will create stasis shards, which should be utilised to get even more melee charges and upkeep frost armor. Against champions and bosses, I still lead with a stasis shuriken to get that initial stun or freeze, and then use heavy ammo if needed. Against these types of targets, Silence and Squall can also be used to great effect, but this can also be used against groups of enemies too, and it's really an incredibly underrated super, and while playing aggressively, you will have it off cooldown very frequently. Also, because of the cooldown reductions of grenades and melee in collecting stasis shards or the fragment Whisper of Shards, it is possible to make this almost an ability only build. This is why I suggested 2 special weapons as options, as you really don't actually need all that much weapon ammo. Special ammo finisher can also be used, alongside stasis and void cipher mods to generate the orbs needed, and additionally both heavy handed and firepower can be used if you require even more orbs. Alternatively, Velocity Baton can create more than enough just by itself, so use either or all of these options. You can also do some silly things with this build, like using stasis shurikens to create stasis crystals on a wall, and then you can jump on them to climb it. Or create stasis crystals just for the sake of destroying them to activate Whisper of Shards if you just need more grenades. Weapons with ability focused perks such as Demolitionist or Pugilist work great here, due to that high ability uptime. Or even options such as Trench Barrel Shotguns, as these can be repeatedly procced with shurikens. If you wanted, you could swap out a fragment for Whisper of Rending. This one makes primary ammo weapons deal 100% bonus damage to frozen targets. Try this out with a primary weapon which has a high damage alt fire mode, such as Revision Zero or Vex Mythoclast, as these will be able to 2-shot champions even in GM activities, which is actually kind of crazy to think about. If I was to select a fragment to replace, it would probably be Durance, as it isn't really that critical. Also, here's the armor mods I use. The only ones which matter I have already covered, but if you want to copy the setup then go for it. I will of course include a dim link in the description too if you find that easier. Thank you for watching.